Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in yet again. Happy Wednesday to you all. We have made it to the middle of the week, which means looking ahead even more to week 3 as we are at the midway point of the week. But especially Thursday Night Football coming up tomorrow. Another AFC East primetime game with the New England Patriots will take on the New York Jets. So we're going to give you all the betting odds. Welcome to the chat. Andre, one of my favorite commenters on this show. We're also going to be looking at Thursday Night Football prop bets. We're also going to be looking at more positional rankings as I give you my personal rankings based off of certain matchups for this weekend slate of games. And finally, I'm going to give you guys another shadow report as Andre, already with the questions, Perine or Carson Steele off waivers? That's a very interesting question because both of these running backs are in situations where either their running back room is not decided yet, or in the case of Carson Steele, he will most likely see a lot more touches as the Isaiah Pacheco injury progresses. So that being said, I like Perine's profile better, but I'm not sure how he fits into the whole Bengals system. In terms of Steele, I think that he's more of a fullback option. He could be interesting in the passing game. As Andre says, it's so hard because there's a chance they split carries too, right? There definitely is a chance because Zach Moss, Chase Brown already ahead of Perine in the ranks there in the Bengals. So Steele certainly seems like the better option because of circumstance, but Perine right now is the better player, I believe. I think that in terms of value, though, that's right. Perine is on the Chiefs now. I'm sorry, I made him mixed up a little bit here because they played the Bengals. That's right. So Perine's on the Chiefs and Steele. So that makes it a little bit more interesting because Perine, I expect, will get more value out of the touches he does get, but Carson Steele kind of is more valuable as a Chief, if you understand what I'm saying. He kind of fits the ideology of what they're running on offense a little bit more. So it's going to be a weird one, but if you had to pick one, I would say Perine just because of the experience, just because of the know-how of fitting into an NFL offense. So Perine to me just feels like, even though he may get less touches in the system, he'll make the most of them, if that makes sense. But fantastic question. Good one as well. But getting back to what's happening on the show, we're closing out with a shadow report of the wide receiver cornerback matchups that could define the fantasy football week for you and others in your league. But before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you yet again to like, follow, and subscribe to the show in the network. Everything you do in that regard is greatly appreciated. Also, Andre is already doing that and exemplifying this in such a fantastic way. Keep on making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Things, and Super Stickers features on YouTube. Whether it be questions, comments, concerns, even tips and donations, anything that you leave is greatly appreciated. If you want your name included into the show, if you want your comments included in the show, keep on doing what you're doing and making the show even better. Without further ado, let us jump into our first segment of the day here. Just talking about an overall betting preview for tomorrow night's game between the Patriots and the Jets. And it's going to be an interesting matchup. Another primetime AFC East game. This one a little bit less glitz and glamour surrounding it, so to speak. Not the most exciting of games for the Thursday night slate, but it could be one of those games where we learn a lot about both these teams. The Patriots, as Andre said, I'm so torn if I want to start Ramondre. You should be, because I love Ramondre Stevenson, and what he's shown at the start of the season is that for as long as the Patriots are going to rely on him, he'll try and do his best to really elevate the offensive production the Patriots are able to produce. But that being said, he is kind of very risky because I don't know how long that this whole run game is going to work for the Patriots. I don't know how long they're going to be able to retain that offensive scheme without risk of injury or risk of being figured out as well. So I would say you should actually start him for this game, but be sure to monitor his progress through the weeks because they're going to face an encounter a lot more opposing defenses that will want to hone in on the run game. But that is a fantastic point as well, because he's such an interesting enigma of a fantasy player right now. But in terms of bettering, and as Andre also says, over Rachaad White, I would say perhaps yes, because I think this is the game for the Jets defense to show out, as Andre as well. The thing about Rachaad White, though, is that as much as that Bucs offense is really impressive, he hasn't necessarily been the kind of player that I expected he was going to be in this offense. I think the best part of that Bucs offense is Baker's improvisational skills and the fact that he's getting more comfortable throwing to both Godwin and Evans, and it's shown through the first 2 games. But it is against the Broncos. You are right in that regard. And Rachaad White can be used in many different ways. But I still think Ramondre Stevenson is just one of those backs who just brings that physicality to every game. And we don't really know until he's stopped if he can be stopped. That's the point I'm trying to get to here. I think that right now Ramondre Stevenson holds a lot of value in this league until proven otherwise. Whereas Rachaad White really has underwhelmed me in the Bucs offense up to this point. Let's talk about how you can bet on this game as well, because this is a game where a lot of questions have to be answered for both teams, especially, as Andre alluded to, the Jets defense. That's going to be one of the key matchups, how Ramondre Stevenson fits into this Jets defense and goes up against this Jets defense, rather. So, looking at the overall numbers, looking at the overall spread, the Jets are 6.5-point favorites. They are at home, and it kind of makes sense, right? Because even though the Patriots have been impressive, they stayed in the Seattle game last week. They had the upset over the Cincinnati Bengals in the first week. I still feel like pundits and odds makers are out on them, because at some point there has to be a period where they have a significant amount of regression. I don't necessarily think it's as early as week 3, and this game is going to be much closer than it should appear, but at the end of the day, the Jets should be lucky to be favorites in this game, and I think they are deserved favorites, maybe not as much as 6.5-point favorites, because that's a very lofty spread and not giving much credit to what New England has been able to do. That being said, if we go back to last year, both of these teams were very horrible against the spread. The Pats especially, they're only 5-11-1 against the spread last season, whereas New York was 6-10-1 against the spread. So make of that what you will. Both of these teams do not perform well in spread situations. The over/under, let's talk about that. 39 right now. Seems very low for this game, but it's to be expected. Both of these teams feel like they're working out the kinks a little bit. The Patriots are trying to contend for as long as possible with this offensive scheme, whereas the Jets really haven't necessarily cohered, even though they had a pretty convincing win against Tennessee last weekend. So this game could go many different ways. I pretend to think that this is going to be a slugfest of a game, but who knows? Both these teams have their identities, or believe they have their identities so far, and they're going to want to implement them in this divisional game. And that could really pave the path for a shock result, or it could pave the path for one of these teams to take full command of this game. Right now, though, I will take the Jets. They're also at minus 298 in terms of money lines, and the Pats at plus 240. So you can see the unevenness there. I will take the Jets in this game still. And even though I don't think they will cover the spread, I do think that we'll see glimpses and potential of what we expect from this offense. Much like what we saw in the Tennessee game. I think that Aaron Rodgers, isn't necessarily fully up to speed in this system. I think that it's nice that Breece Hall and Braylon Allen as well, the young rookie, had those big games, but overall I still think they're kind of putting pieces of the puzzle together still, and it's not going to equate to immediate success until later in the season. Even though they can continue to stockpile wins, in this manner, much like they did against Tennessee. So I think the Jets win this game, but they don't cover the spread. And so ultimately, this is going to be a very hard game to bet on, is what I'm saying. I think that you're going to have to consider the fact that both of these teams, like I said, feel like they're building something, but it's just a matter of cohering and being cohesive, especially in games like divisional games. So, at the end of the day, this game, I say I want to go the under, but if this pretends to be a blowout in your mind, and it could very well be if, the Jets somehow come out there and dominate on both sides of the ball, but I still see this going under. I don't see the Jets really overwhelming the Patriots as much. I think the Patriots will be ready for whatever the Jets throw at them. That being said, in terms of my final score prediction for this game, I'm taking the Jets 20-10. I think that the Patriots just will run out of gas in terms of what they can do offensively. I think that Jacoby Brissett will be called into action way more than he wants him to be, Gerard Mayo, and ultimately the Jets will find different ways to continue to put up points. Maybe not as consistently as people would expect them to do, but they will find enough offense to get over the line. The Jets defense, much like Andre seems to think as well, will kind of get right in this game. I think the Patriots offense is a perfect one where you can feel comfortable playing many different schemes, playing many different coverages if you're in the secondary, and I think that they will get back to their best. That being said, it wouldn't shock me to see Ramondre Stevenson grind down another team, much like he did against Cincinnati, much like what he tried to do against Seattle. So, overall, it's a very weird Thursday night game. Let me know what you think in the comments about how this game could go, what you're thinking betting-wise as well. But we are going to take a quick break. Coming up next on the other side, we'll be looking at some popular prop bets for this game and certain players who I think can stand out as well. So we'll be right back after this short break. You don't want to miss this next segment.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world?
Hello everyone and welcome back yet again to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys enjoyed that first segment. Before we get into our second segment of the day, still concerning prop bets as well, I do want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined, and some of you have been doing a fantastic job of doing this already, make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube so that you can interact more with the show. Anything you leave, questions, comments, concerns, tips, and donations are greatly appreciated by all concerned, especially me and my fellow podcasters here at the network. So consider doing that. We are making the show even better with your input. So continue doing what you're doing and continue having a positive response to the show. And I promise each and every single segment will get better and better. But without further ado, let us jump right into our second segment. Before we do that, I do want to address another comment we got from Pate. Should I replace Rico Dowdle or Keon Coleman with Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, or Jordan Addison? All three of them just got dropped into waivers. Now, this is an interesting one as well because when I look at Rico Dowdle and Keon Coleman, they're players who had a lot of hope and optimism coming into the season in terms of how they profile to fit into their different offenses, but so far have been kind of disappointing. It's clear to see that Dallas really has no sense of urgency in getting other players outside of, say, 3 guys like Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb. I'll throw Jake Ferguson in there if they try and get him the ball. They're not trying to get any other offensive weapon going here. And it's really maddening if you're a fantasy owner of guys in the backfield for them, like Rico Dowdle, like Ezekiel Elliott. So I think that you are right in your sense of urgency to try and replace him as well. And I feel the same way about Keon Coleman. It's clear to me that this Bills offense under Joe Brady is transitioning more to playing it safe, whereas Keon Coleman could have been brought in to really try and extend the field and be one of those guys that can move the chains. But we're seeing more and more that when Josh Allen is throwing the football, it's either short passes or he's relying upon a guy in Khalil Shakir who he has already worked with. So I do believe your sentiment is correct in wanting to replace both of these guys. As to who out of Cooper, Allen, or Addison I would choose Jordan Addison. And the reasoning behind this is, yes, right now the Vikings wide receiver room is murky and he right now is unhealthy as well. But when he comes back, right, I feel like Sam Darnold has already proven with the weapons he has already that he's willing to distribute the ball to all of them. And there really hasn't been, outside of Justin Jefferson, a standout Vikings wide receiver. So once guys like Addison, Hawkinson come back, be sure to really dive into the treasure trove that is the Vikings wide receiver room, because it's one of the most versatile and has proven to be one of the most versatile in the entire NFL. So that's a good question. So if you want to replace more, it's going to be interesting because I don't have much upside concerning Cooper or Allen. I think that both of them are on the older side. They're in offenses that really are kind of struggling at this moment in time. So I would say Jordan Addison has the most upside. Yes, you might have to wait a little bit for him, as Camden Christensen also jumps into this conversation. But we'll get to your comment in just 1 second, Camden. But to your point, Pate, Jordan Addison is the way to go to replace both of these guys. But let's go now to Camden's comment. Would you trade Jamar Chase and Ramondre Stevenson for Garrett Wilson and Jonathan Taylor? This is a very interesting trade as well, because I personally have, as Pate says, thank you, I personally have Garrett Wilson on my team, and he really has been kind of underwhelming. I think that he's one of those players, and I'll mention this tomorrow, who has the most to prove in the system for the Jets. So it's really just a matter of him clicking with Aaron Rodgers, and Jonathan Taylor on the other side of things as well. He's someone who I'm kind of disappointed in too. He's someone who I thought would really help set the tone for Anthony Richardson, not, hinder him or kind of lord over him in the backfield. So I don't necessarily think that package really holds more weight than what you're offering him in this league. Jamar Chase and Ramondre Stevenson, let's look at it this way. Ramondre Stevenson holds the weight of 2 players right now because of his importance to the Patriots, and most importantly, his importance to their immediate success on offense. And Jamar Chase, yes, he's had the whole contract dispute. He hasn't necessarily looked himself early on, but at the end of the day, I'm not worried about the Bengals too much. I think they will find their footing. I think they will find a way to win more games, and Jamar Chase will be a big part of that. So in terms of this trade, I would not let this trade happen. As much as I love both Wilson and Taylor and believe they can truly progress through the season very well in terms of fantasy, I just think that right now you're in a good place if you have guys like Jamar Chase and Ramondre Stevenson on your team, because A, Ramondre Stevenson is giving you a lot right now, and B, Jamar Chase is going to give you a lot in the future. So maybe at a later date, another trade would work out in this situation because I'm still kind of concerned about Ramondre Stevenson in this offense, and especially concerned for his health. But right now, this trade should not go through at this point in time. I hope that helps you, Cameron, and good luck to you in all your fantasy exploits as well. So, without further ado, though, let us get into our Thursday Night Football props, starting off with Ramondre Stevenson here. And Cameron Christensen does mention that his team here has Stroud, Ramondre Stevenson, Gibbs, and as he agrees with me, what I do want to shout out your team here because as I'm looking at it, it's a solid team too. Stroud, Ramondre Stevenson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Chase, Nico Collins, McBride, and Etienne. I think holding them will be the move as well. I agree. This is a very solid team. You have a very solid, high-end QB in your system. Ramondre Stevenson, as always, is going to be kind of boomer bust in the weeks to come, but right now he has a lot of value. Jahmyr Gibbs, I expect him to grow as well. That receiving room, very impressive, especially with Nico Collins and there stacking with CJ Stroud. And McBride and Travis Etienne rounding it out. You can't get better than that. McBride really growing into this team. I really think he's going to be a huge asset in that Arizona Cardinals offense. And Travis Etienne will have to step up for the Jacksonville Jaguars to have any hope of finding any offensive footing. And thank you to Camden Christensen for your comments. But looking at Thursday Night Football, really going to be a little bit brief here in terms of summing everything up. As much as I appreciate your comments, we do have a little less time now to go over these props. Ramondre Stevenson, though, I think this game, it will be safe to say he will hit the over. I'm really, like I said, concerned about what his prop bets are going to look in the future. As you know, the wear and tear of an NFL season has its effect on him, but up to this point, he's averaged 100.5 yards per game exactly, 4.4 yards per carry. So I'm not worrying too much about him. I'm still holding out hope that he will continue to have a fantastic season, but it's all dependent on whether or not, opposing defenses are looking to shut him down as well, to shut down the Patriots as well, because as he goes, the Patriots go. That's what I think. And there's only a certain point where bully ball can get you wins or keep you in games, so it might have to change in the future. But Ramondre Stevenson, for now, is always going to be a solid option. Let's look at a player who also kind of has a little bit of a point to prove. Maybe not as much as others in this game, but Aaron Rodgers. I think that up to this point, we really haven't seen, much of Aaron Rodgers as a fantasy prospect, but in terms of how he's fitting into the system, I feel like it's starting to click a little bit more. I feel like he's getting more comfortable, and he will continue to get more comfortable as the season goes on. But right now, it's kind of in limbo as to how the Jets in these early stages will progress. But it's all about progression with this offense. That being said, I do see him having under 31.5 pass attempts and at minus 114. I'll take this bet because I think that in order to beat the Patriots, I'll take the Seattle Seahawks blueprint and how to beat the Patriots. You either have to grind them out on the ground, really stretch the defense on the perimeters, as Hunter 18 entered the chat. As he says, someone in my league dropped Zeke. Should I pick him up? If so, who do I drop? Benson, Bigsby, Dowdle, or Swift? Now this is an interesting one because Zeke is one of those players who I really was holding out hope for. As soon as he signed with the Cowboys, I was thinking he could be a fantastic fit for this team. As Hunter also says, it's a PPR. When I look at your running back rooms, Benson, he's an interesting player. Bigsby as well. Both of those guys are still very young. Trey Benson in that Arizona Cardinals offense does kind of look appealing. Dowdle, we've talked about him a little bit so far, not getting as many touches as we hoped. And DeAndre Swift, I have him on my PPR team personally as well, and he's been disappointing, as has the Bears' run game in general. So I think that you can pick up Zeke because he's an interesting risk to take, and even though your running back room isn't necessarily the best per se, there's a lot of depth there. You did very well in having players who provide a lot of balance, but also are kind of hopeful prospects as well. So I say go for it, but at this point in time, I'm not sure what he would bring to your team. That being said, in order to pick him up, the player who I think you would drop from this has to be Bigsby, because I don't think that he's going to be as impressive as we've seen him. We don't have as much statistical evidence that he can continue producing in an offense, but who knows? I say that you should go for it, and you should go for it knowing the fact that your running back room is just very well balanced, if that. So thank you for your comment, Hunter. Good luck to you in your fantasy exploits. But just closing out this prop bet segment, because we have run out of time a little bit, let's talk about the other QB in this situation very briefly. Jacoby Brissett, just kind of being that serviceable, competent quarterback you want if you're an NFL team who does not have a good QB situation. Not necessarily, forcing anything, but protecting the ball just the same. But he's going to be under 168.5 pass yards. Thank you to you as well, Hunter. Hopefully that whole process works out for you. Jacoby Brissett, though, I just think that at this moment in time, they're still going to go with what they've got. Gerard Mayo seems insistent on his plan working, and the plan is the run game, at least offensively. So look for Jacoby Brissett. Let me know what you think in the comments about Jacoby Brissett and Aaron Rodgers, and overall the skill position players as well in this Thursday night matchup. But that will just about do it for this segment. Coming next, we continue with my personal positional rankings for the week ahead. Looking at the wide receivers, bear with me though. There are some last-minute adjustments I had to make to this list due to all the injuries at the wide receiver position, but it should be a fascinating segment that you don't want to miss. But we'll be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GS.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Looking ahead to our third segment, we are shifting gears from looking ahead to the Thursday night football game tomorrow and switching back to my personal fantasy positional rankings for this week. We did the QBs and running backs yesterday. Now we're going to do the wide receivers and tight ends today. But first, we're looking at the wide receivers, and this has kind of changed, right, because of all the injuries. I was going to say that Justin Jefferson was going to be the first player I mentioned, but of course, unfortunate circumstances occurred there. But overall, that just really broadens the horizons of what this wide receiver market can become. Because, as you know, injuries stockpile, and they're always very unfortunate, and they're always kind of leaving you scrambling in terms of fantasy, trying to find a contingency plan. I think that the wide receiver market is more versatile than ever. You can take more chances, you can take more risks. And no matter who you're risking it on, I feel like you should feel comfortable knowing that some of these injuries aren't as worse as you thought. For example, the Justin Jefferson injury isn't as worse as we thought. Yes, the Kupp and Nakua ones are very bad, and they will miss an extended period of time, but there's still situations where you can make different wide receivers work. And so I'm going to talk about some guys who aren't injured and can help you as well. Starting off with the guy who I've been disappointed in especially. I drafted this guy having a lot of hope in him in the Chicago Bears offense because of the fact he had so much experience there already and projected to be the wide receiver one in that three-headed room right there. DJ Moore. I think that DJ Moore, this is a get-right game for him against the Colts. And not for nothing, Here's an interesting stat about the Colts this season so far. They've allowed the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. When I look at the Colts, I love their front 7. I love their linebacker room. I love E.J. Speed. I love Zaire Franklin. I love the depth up front. But the secondary leaves a lot to be desired, and I think this is the opportunity. As Hunter 18 has another question. I love to see it. Kind of another part of my question. I have the number 1 waiver spot. I save it and hope Zeke just becomes a free agent. That's an interesting one. I think that hopefully they can find a way, Dallas, to make Zeke work in this offense, because if they do, it can really open up a lot more varieties. They're not stuck playing with an over-reliance on CeeDee Lamb. But it could be a smart move in the future, you know? Having the number 1 waiver spot gives you a lot of advantages over other people. You're always the first one, either Tuesday morning, looking at ways to improve your team, and you'll be the first one to get the player should you actually get the whole process done over with. So it's going to be interesting to see the fallout of what the Cowboys do with this offense. Because right now, we have 2 very contrasting games to diagnose with them. We have the Browns game, which really, if you think about it, wasn't as impressive an offensive performance as we think. And then you have the Saints game, obviously, which really did not look impressive in the slightest. In fact, it looked abysmal for their offense. So it's an interesting plan. I would say if you're really confident that Zeke will find a better situation, then you can have the potential to wait. But if you actually feel like Zeke can be the answer in this Dallas Cowboys offense and get more touches, then by all means, since you have the number 1 waiver spot, you have the power to make that decision. And a lot of people will start to kind of agree or follow your order as well, because you hold so much power over what they do as well. So if you set a precedent, then it will be interesting. But it is an interesting proposition to think about Zeke finding perhaps a better fit for him than Dallas. So I do think that is a very interesting question. I would say my answer right now is we'll wait and see what the Dallas Cowboys offense is, because I can't really say what the Dallas Cowboys offense is going to look like on a week-by-week basis. But it's an interesting proposition, and I thank you for leaving that question, because it's always something to consider. Looking at DJ Moore against the Colts. Yes, a lot of it is going to depend on Caleb kind of progressing a little more. We can't necessarily blame the Texans' loss on Caleb that much, because he was getting harassed by the Texans' front 7 very often. But if they do find a way to protect Caleb Williams, and Caleb Williams finds a way to protect himself in turn, look for DJ Moore to be his number 1 target. I think Caleb Williams has to start respecting the fact that experience in the offensive scheme already gets you farther than just trying to improvise all the time. So, especially against a Colts defense that has weaknesses that they can exploit in the secondary, they can have many different alignments if they so choose, the Chicago Bears. It's going to be a game where either DJ Moore continues to fail to impress or gets cemented as the wide receiver 1, and Caleb pretends to be comfortable, or the most comfortable he's been in a game so far as a result. But another guy that I wanted to talk about, who has kind of had an up and down start to the season, had a decent game against Tampa Bay this weekend, Amon-Ra St. Brown, another guy who I have, ironically. So 2 guys that I have on my fantasy football team that I'm telling you about, hopefully having prove-it games this week. Amon-Ra is going to have a fantastic season, there's no doubt. But as we've seen with the Lions, as Hunter, no worries, Hunter. If you have one more question, I'm glad to take it. Thank you for all your comments. Would you rather have Alec Pierce or Wan'Dale Robinson on the bench? I think this one is simple. I would rather have Alec Pierce. Yes, it's nice to have Wan'Dale Robinson and potentially hope that Daniel Jones gets right. But right now, it's a question of which quarterback can get their wide receiver the ball and have more confidence even though it might take a little bit longer for him and Anthony Richardson getting the ball to Alec Pierce than Wando Robinson getting catches from Daniel Jones. Now, it is going to be one of those situations where these guys just might not break out at all, and it's kind of a premature look into overreacting to one performance from both of these guys, but right now I would say I have more confidence that Alec Pierce can have another one or two good performances in his season this year because of the potentiality of, as Hunter 18 says, Richardson is his QB, so I'm kind of hoping Pierce was the pick. And I agree with that sentiment. It would be a nice stack, and let's hope that Anthony Richardson's raw potential gets realized and he can find a way to mix that talent that he has with his arm strength with the ability to, we get another comment, with his ability to run the football as well, but we're going to have to see. That's always the question. But Alec Pierce will be the pick. We got another comment here from Taco, who is 2-0 in fantasy. He just got offered Jamar Chase and Kenneth Walker for Kyron Williams and Chris Godwin. Take it. I have Hurts, Kyron, and James Conner are his two running backs. AJB, I believe that is AJ Brown and Chris Godwin. Sam Laporta, the tight end. Jordan Mason as his flex. His bench is George Pickens, Rico Dowdle, Roma Dunze, Algier. Also got offered Tyreek and Chubb for the same. I actually like the first trade a little bit better because I love Chris Godwin. He's had an unexpectedly fantastic start to the season, and he's really gelled with Baker as that wide receiver 2 in Tampa. But Kyron, I've been disappointed in him. I thought that he was going to have a bad season so far, and so far he's proved it. Only 75 yards across 2 games. Whereas Kenneth Walker, yeah, he was out for a long stretch of time, but when he comes into that Seattle offense, we saw it in that game against Denver. When they put the ball in his hands, he really is the difference for them. He's really the X factor in that Seattle offense. So look for him to get a lot of touches going forward when he's at full health. And Jamar Chase, we've talked about him before. Yes, the contract disputes is a huge thing, but he's still the wide receiver 1 in that offense. So I really like that trade. I think you should take it, and this really improves your team as well. If you look at your running back room, you now would have Kenneth Walker and James Conner, 2 NFC West guys who I really like. In your wide receiver room, you have 2 of the best wide receiver 1s, or well, A.J. Brown kind of is a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 hybrid. And then Jamar Chase and Laporta. I love Laporta as well, and Jordan Mason's a good flex to have for the foreseeable future. So I think that this will be a fantastic team if you take that first trade. Tyreek and Chubb, it's a crapshoot right now because Tyreek lost Tua for a long time, and we don't know what Chubb will look like if he comes back or when he comes back, or if he comes back at all this season. So I like that first trade a lot because it adds a lot of depth to both your wide receiver and running back rooms. So thank you for your question, Taco. Good luck to you and your exploits. As Hunter 18 says, sadly I have Puka, so I have to start Brian Thomas Jr. Thoughts on him? I think that Brian Thomas Jr. isn't the worst Jacksonville Jaguars receiver to have, but let's remember he is a Jacksonville Jaguar, and that offense has not clicked in the slightest. Yes, he's had a couple big plays. He had the touchdown in the game against Miami, but at the end of the day, it's all dependent on Trevor Lawrence, right? Trevor Lawrence does not look comfortable this season, only 51% pass completion rate so far. So it's really dependent on if this offense can click at all. But unfortunately, I don't think that Brian Thomas Jr., his talent is going to be realized if Trevor Lawrence's ineptitude is continued. But that's an interesting question. I hope for you, for your sake, that Brian Thomas Jr. is going to perform very well because Puka looks to be out for a considerable amount of time. But right now, I see no way forward for him in this offense. But let's get back to close out the segment talking about Amon-Ra here. Last week, a little bit of a good performance, a little bit of hope and optimism surrounding what he can still do in this Lions offense. But if you've seen, this offense has become kind of more run-oriented. David Montgomery has had a couple big games. Gibbs also well. But also, Jared Goff feels more comfortable seemingly throwing to Jameson Williams, getting the deep ball going, which is weird because I think Jared Goff looks more comfortable in the short to intermediate areas of the field. So we're going to have to see with Amon-Ra. I hope that Amon-Ra performs. I drafted him 5th overall, for God's sake, in my fantasy league. So for my sake, I hope that he does well. But thank you all for your comments. Unfortunately, we do have to take a quick break. But coming up on the other side, we switch to tight ends. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns about the tight end position in fantasy, I'll be glad to answer them as well. But you do have to take a short break, and we'll be right back on the other side.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Thank you all for your comments. I really appreciate all of them. If you have any more questions, comments, or concerns concerning this next segment, as we were looking at my personal positional rankings of the tight end position, please consider leaving them as well. I also appreciate all the trade analyses that you are looking for guidance on. So continue with that as well. I really love it and really appreciate it. And good luck to you all in your fantasy football exploits for Week 3. But without further ado, let's jump into our 4th segment of the day. Let's look at my personal fantasy tight end rankings. As Andre said, what a weird start it's been for tight ends, and I have to agree. Bowers, tight end 1, just crazy. I do have a concern with tight ends. I have Laporta, says Hunter 18. All fantastic points, and I agree with all of them. Tight ends, like I said before the season, are always going to be weird because you now have, like I said, this youthful movement of tight ends coming into the league. Your Laportas, your Kincaids, your McBrides, and then you have the old guard in Kelsey, Kittle, and Andrews, who you're still holding out hope can still perform for you, but also have underperformed to some extent in these past 2 games. So this list is highly indicative of how this change in the mindset of how we view the tight end market has affected how I and you guys also view how to draft tight ends. So let's start off with the guys who I think can perform this week, but it's really a crapshoot at this point because I don't know which tight end is going to be tight end what week in, week out. But let's start off with Brock Bowers, who Andre mentioned. Actually, wrong graphic. Brock Bowers finally had a breakout game like everyone was expecting with 18.8 fantasy points in that game against Baltimore on 9 catches on 9 targets, 98 yards. And the thing about Brock Bowers, right, is that a lot of people expecting him coming out of Georgia being very impressive there was that he was immediately going to be one of the best offensive weapons for Las Vegas. But it hasn't been the case because this Las Vegas Raiders team really has been kind of weird in how they set up offensively. I don't necessarily know what Antonio Pierce's game plan is, but it involves some sort of letting Gardner Minshew have some modicum of control over it, but also relying on Alexander Madison and Zamir White to try and find chunk plays, but preferring Alexander Madison. It's just a very weird offensive setup. So I don't really know Brock Bowers' role week in and week out in this offense. But if they give him the ball, he can have big games. And he was one of the reasons why I feel like Las Vegas was able to get back into that game against Baltimore and ultimately win it. So in terms of Brock Bowers going forward and potentially being the tight end 1, it's not a crazy proposition to think about because Laporta, remember him, last year's rookie season, tight end 1 for the entire season, only had 900 or something yards. So it's not like it's far-fetched to think that Brock Bowers could, but doesn't know he's in an offense that really has no sense of direction in how he's going to fit into it. So take him week by week. If you are an owner of him, hold out hope that somehow, some way, the Vegas Raiders will get him the football because he is one of the most talented players on offense. The next up, I have David Njoku, another guy who's kind of been disappointing, but it's not ultimately his fault, as when you have Deshaun Watson at quarterback, at this point in his career, he's not the best person to throw you the football. So, David Njoku, though, he's playing against the Giants, has had a couple injury concerns this season, but I think he will play against New York. Let's hope he can play, because he did not play against Jacksonville. But I've been saying this. If Kevin Stefanski wants this Deshaun Watson experience to have any sort of success to it, you need to involve David Njoku. David Njoku is a valuable asset, whether it be in the play-action passing game or just as one of your better receivers overall. Because look at this receiving room. I don't like Amari Cooper right now. He's aging, and I don't think Deshaun Watson trusts him as a wide receiver one. And Jerry Jeudy, yes, he's shown flashes of being potentially a nice receiver to have, but he's never really put it all together to the point where I trust him for an entire 17-game season. So the answer that's left is David Njoku at this point. So hopefully David Njoku is healthful enough to contribute what he can to the Browns offense, but it's ultimately up to Kevin Stefanski, Deshaun Watson, and the OC to find a way to make it happen to get Njoku more involved, because he was the reason, let's be honest, that Joe Flacco had a lot of success in that offense and ultimately led them to the playoffs, because David Njoku was just so reliable over that period of time. And now just seeing him not take control of this offense is kind of appalling to me, because he is thus valuable, and who knows when trouble will be back and what he'll look like. So you have to have some contingency plan for your offense. Look for David Njoku, potentially, if he plays, to have a big bounce-back game for you in fantasy. But then, looking at Dallas Goedert, this is a guy who is kind of in that Jake Ferguson, TJ Hawkinson when he's healthy vein, who's a guy who has that one trait that a lot of people like and hone in on when they're looking for a good fantasy tight end. But it's also a question of how this offense plays out. And what we've seen from the Eagles is that Hurts and Barkley are trying to make magic happen. And even though I was really impressed with the way Hurts distributed the ball to his secondary weapons outside of guys named Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert really has been falling by the wayside in this offense. But against New Orleans, I do feel like the Eagles can be playing catch-up in this game, because the Saints' offense has looked like one of the NFL's best. So it could be a classic OK Corral shootout where you're going to have to throw the football to more targets and get them more touches and get them more involved in this offense. And so Dallas Goedert's production could project to go up. And I know it's wishful thinking, but I think that Dallas Goedert can be an interesting weapon to have. He's a very good short yardage situational tight end. He's not, going to get you yak, but he is going to get you valuable yardage and maybe a touchdown or two. And so I hope that the Eagles' offense can find a way to incorporate him into this team, because he could be a valuable asset for them and for you in fantasy in terms of those implications. So just those three guys really could stand out. But just going off the list, all of these guys are very similar that I talked about. Jake Ferguson going up against the Ravens. And I'm really shocked that Jake Ferguson does not have a higher usage rate or target share this season. Because last season, I feel like the reason why the Cowboys' regular season success was so impressive was because Dak had, as Shep Easy Sweet Spot said, Hawkins head and shoulders above Goddard. Well, get him healthy then. If Hawkinson isn't on the field, I can't necessarily, award him for his exploits. So I love Hawkinson as much as the next guy. I think in that tier of players, Hawkinson is the clear kind of guy who you feel can ascend to high-end tight end 2 status for your fantasy team. But right now, he's just not healthy. And I want to see what he does with Sam Darnold, whether or not he fits back into this offense immediately. So for now, they're going to have to look at guys like Goddard and Jake Ferguson, even though I'm not as confident as I was in them last year, right? Where both of these offenses' successes in the regular season really were contingent on finding different weapons outside of their number one guys. So Jake Ferguson and Dallas Goedert, that's just the way it is, because everyone knows who the top tight ends are. Everyone knows who they want to have their team. They want Laportas, they want Kelsey's, they want Kittles, they want Kincaids, they want Andrews. They, after that, really are kind of in a situation where you have to take things as they come, because the tight end position is not easy after the fact, after all these superstars go. So, as much as Hawkinson's return to the NFL could really help bolster this kind of tier of players, this is the situation we're in. This is kind of where I view the tight end market, to the point where I kind of feel weird saying that Dallas Goedert and Jake Ferguson are going to have big performances and get right performances, because I really have no faith in them from what I've seen through 2 games from both of their offenses, especially with the Eagles one. So, at the end of the day, the bottom line is, once you know a guy like Hawkinson gets healthy, and once you know we kind of figure more about these youthful players like Kincaid and Bride, then we'll have a better understanding of the tight end market. But until then, these 3 guys who I mentioned, all at different points. Dalton Kincaid and Brock Bowers are in that youth movement. Dallas Goedert is kind of in that 3rd, 4th tier. So, make of this list what you will. It's not gospel, it's just my humble opinion. Also, it's based off of matchups, so let me know what you think in the comments. But to close out today's show, we are going to be looking at the wide receiver cornerback matchups will define week 3 in terms of fantasy, maybe win you a couple of games. You don't want to miss the final segment of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast right after this short break. Hello everyone and welcome back to the final segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Before we get into our final segment, we did get a comment right before the break from my man Andre. Jamar is going off this week. He's going to absolutely destroy the Commanders. And I completely agree with you. Yes, that game against the Giants, it was the Giants though. The Commanders secondary did look decent, but against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who does have one of the better 1-2 receiving cores in the league, they got torn apart. So I completely agree with that sentiment. And I especially think that all of these secondary weapons that the Bengals could have, like a guy like Andre Yoshivas, who stepped up in that game against Kansas City, will also wreak havoc. So I'm not as familiar with the Commanders secondary as some of the guys who I'll mention on this list in terms of the cornerback position, but I do believe that Jamar Chase is going to get right, and the Bengals will eventually get right, and I'm not worried about this team. In fact, I'm very relaxed. Yes, they're going to have tough stretches, but I feel like Joe Burrow can take them through it. They really should have won that game against the Chiefs. I'm still mad about that pass interference penalty. If you're not a Chiefs fan, you know exactly what I mean. But at the end of the day, this team is one of the more well-rounded, undeserving, for that matter, 0-2 teams. So, I agree with that same Andre, but let's look at some other receivers and cornerbacks in terms of their matchups for this weekend. Starting off with one that's not happening this weekend, but tomorrow night. That's the wrong graphic again. Garrett Wilson and Christian Gonzalez. Sorry for the misspelling of Gonzalez's last name in advance, but this matchup's really exciting, right? Because we've seen kind of the Jekyll and Hyde performances of Christian Gonzalez throughout the season. Against Jamar Chase, actually, he did kind of lock him down. Jamar only had 62 yards on 6 catches in that game. But then against DK Metcalf, not to toot his horn as a Seattle Seahawks fan, he did have a big game, had 14 catches, I believe, 131 yards, and that one long touchdown, albeit in a situation where there was kind of a broken play and kind of lost him in coverage a little bit. But I think that Garrett Wilson is an interesting proposition because of the fact that they're still gelling, both him and Aaron Rodgers, in terms of getting the trust of each other. Garrett Wilson trying to get the football more often in this offense, while with Aaron Rodgers having his two buddies there, in Lazard and Mike Williams. So it's a day-to-day thing. It's a week-to-week thing. But this matchup, I just wanted to pinpoint because we've seen Jekyll and Hyde performances from both these players to start off the season. And I think the ultimate winner of this battle will have to come down to Aaron Rodgers' QB play, and if he's comfortable enough to start trusting Garrett Wilson more. That being said, I do want to see still some diversity in terms of the Jets' offense, so it could project to be one of those matchups that kind of is underwhelming. But Garrett Wilson, I'm hoping he has a big day. Still in my fantasy team. This game will probably determine whether I cut him or not. Just joking about that because I still have high hope for him. But it's going to be a good one. Coming up next, though, on my list is a matchup that I believe is not going to happen. Justin Jefferson and Derek Stingley versus Derek Stingley and Kamari Lassiter. It's not going to happen, unfortunately. It could happen. As Hunter18 says, should I be worried about Laporta? In terms of the matchup, I don't know whether or not you're alluding to another injury, because I don't necessarily know if Laporta is injured, actually. But I don't think you should be worried about Laporta in the slightest. I think that offense is going to find its footing. Jared Goff's in one of those weird funks where he's kind of reverted back to his start as a Ram in his rookie season when he did not play very well. But I think he'll find his footing. And Laporta is one of his favorite targets as well. He's going to be very effective in the red zone later in the year. And in these coming weeks, as their games get a little bit tougher, they have two NFC West opponents with a lot of friskiness to them in Arizona and Seattle. So it's going to be interesting to see how Jared Goff handles that. But just know that Sam Laporta still has a lot of upside and is still one of my favorite young tight ends in the league. And perhaps in the top tier of tight ends who are more youthful in nature, in my humble opinion. So I don't think you should worry or press the panic button on Laporta just yet. Let's talk about the matchup that didn't happen. Bear with me here. This graphic was made before, the news of all these injuries. But let's actually look at the Vikings receivers against the Texans secondary just in general, because this could be an interesting game. Because you don't have any of your top three guys. You don't have Justin Jefferson, you don't have Jordan Addison, and you don't have TJ Hawkinson. What you do have is a nice kind of supplementary receiving room after the fact with Brandon Powell, who I love as a red zone threat, and Jalen Naylor, who can still extend the field some and really has nice top-end speed, get yards after the catch. So it's going to be a weird game, right? Because this is the Sam Darnold's first game without, Justin Jefferson. So it's going to be interesting to see how he distributes the wealth in that offense. But in terms of the Texans secondary, they really haven't been tested to this point. Yes, with the Indianapolis Colts game, they had the 2 long touchdowns given up. And the Bears game, their front 7 just took over, so we didn't necessarily see many throws by Caleb that threatened them. So this game is really going to be indicative of Sam Darnold's play rather than the Texans secondary. So if you did take a chance on waivers on a wide receiver for the Vikings, this game is going to be all about whether or not Sam Darnold's play can elevate them. But it sucks that Justin Jefferson can't be a part of that matchup either, because it would have been an interesting case to study. Next one. This one got a little bit less interesting, but it could still work out to be a situation where there are a couple deep shots for the Miami offense. Tyreek Hill versus Reek Woolen and Devin Witherspoon. Now, this one could come down to more of how Mike McDaniel operates this offense. I think Skylar Thompson, don't quote me on this, will ultimately get the start. And if he does, it's going to be a lot of dink and dunk in my opinion. They did sign Tyler Huntley to their practice squad. And I think he will have a little bit more upside in this offense if he's given the keys to the car in this game. But at the end of the day, this matchup is definitely lessened. I think that you're going to see a lot of Tyreek Hill coming deep as another question from Hunter18. Keep them coming, my man. Start Richardson or Carr until Richardson finds his footing. Interesting question here. I think that both of these guys have very similar traits, even in their drastic age differences, where they both rely on their deep ball a lot. But right now, Carr's deep ball is translating to a weapon that the Saints can utilize to more better effect, whereas Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson really haven't found the right combination to really get going. So you're right that Richardson is going to struggle a little bit to find his footing. I think that I want to see more out of the Saints offense, but at this point in time, it's just that Derek Carr has been the better QB in my humble opinion, and he has the better offensive weapons, should opposing defenses start to figure them out. So for the time being, you can start Carr. I hope that Anthony Richardson does get better. He has a lot of good traits that he can utilize to the best of his abilities later on in the season. But as of this current moment, you're right in acknowledging the fact that Derek Carr can be a high-end starter based off of the 2 games that he's played already. Let's look at, again, this matchup really made less interesting because if Tua was in there, you had to have thought that there would have been a couple deep shots to test the Seattle's corners, especially in the new McDonald era, what with him incorporating his new ideas and, these young players trying to learn it. But right now, I think Reek Woolen and Devon Witherspoon just gain a huge advantage in the fact that Tua isn't playing. But it could be interesting if Tyler Huntley plays, because as he's more ambitious, I believe, than Skylar Thompson. But it's going to come down to, how Mike McDaniel handles it. The last one's another one that I did not foresee happening with Cooper Kupp, which I very swore. But another, again, the Minnesota Vikings wide receiver room, the Los Angeles Rams wide receiver room, is one where you get a lot of depth outside of it as well. I think that in that case, though, you also are concerned about Matthew Stafford, whether or not, a lot of pressure starts falling on him. They have a lot of offensive line issues. I think Steve Alala is going to come back at some point in the season. Jonah Jackson, though, is expected to miss an extended period of time. Joe Noteboom as well. So that is more concerning than, the loss of wide receivers. But they still have depth at the position. Tutu Atwell is interesting. I believe they still have Demarcus Robinson, another guy who can extend the field. Colby Park is an interesting tight end. Knowing him from his time at Seattle, he can have a couple of nice games for you. But yeah, it just sucks that both Jefferson and Kupp were guys who I thought were going to have breakout games this week in high-profile matchups, and it just falls that they're injured. But there are still a lot of other options as well that I didn't put in this graphic and really realized as recently as today that they can have big matchups. So let's talk about those guys outside of what I have on my screen. Rashee Rice. Let's talk about Rashee Rice. I think that against A.J. Terrell and Mike Hughes in that Falcons secondary, that really is performing under the facade, I guess, is the right word for it. I don't necessarily think they were impressive against Philly. I just think that in the red zone, they kind of shored up a little bit more than I thought they would. But overall, they didn't really stand out to me in terms of what they did. I think the front seven for Falcons is what stood out to me the most on the defensive side of the football for them. But this matchup can really prove that Rashee Rice warrants a look in deeper leagues, maybe as a wide receiver 2 or a flex option. Because right now, he is projecting to be a high-end wide receiver 1 in Kansas City. And Patrick Mahomes is starting to trust him more and more, not just over the middle, but you saw the deep shot in that game against Cincy. I think that Rashee Rice is getting more mature in his route tree, and what with, Travis Kelce not finding his footing, Xavier Worthy, he's going to get more touches, but he's still finding his way in this offense, and just the approach of Andy Reid of rotating his receivers in and out, I think that, Rashee Rice is going to have a lot more opportunities to prove himself and cement himself as a wide receiver 1. And why not do it against one of still the more underrated secondaries in the league, even though they haven't really shown it as of yet. And then Mike Evans against Pat Surtain II, another interesting matchup because the Broncos defense really, again, another defense that hasn't looked impressive on paper. They've held certain teams to certain point totals, but at the end of the day, Pat Surtain is still the best corner in the league, in my opinion. One of the best, the best player on the Broncos by far. Matching up against Mike Evans, the most experienced, most consistent receiver in the league. I think that is going to be an interesting matchup that Baker Mayfield's going to want to exploit. Expect this matchup to only happen about 80% of the time in the game, as Mike Evans can align anywhere. He aligns in the slot more often than not. So they're going to move Mike Evans around a lot, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but look out for Pat Surtain II to try and follow him as best as possible. But those are just few of the receivers that I think will have interesting games against certain cornerbacks who I'm really looking at to help their defenses. But let me know what you think in the comments. But that'll just about do it for today's show. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for your lovely comments. Keep them coming from the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features on YouTube. Also, consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show and the network as a whole. It's a huge support to my fellow podcasters and the network as a whole. But other than that, we'll be right back here on the GSMC Sports Network, same time as always, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, with another great show. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm out.